Well, the question is how, what do we replace with the various phases of life that I mentioned this morning. I mentioned the need to disengage from our religious, the religious structures, the religious tradition, the humanist tradition, the scientific, mechanistic science, and our jurisprudence, that as these exist at the present time, they are incompetent in dealing with the issues that confront us. They're all immobilized or de-energized or confounded by the situation. You cannot get our answers out of any of those four as they exist at the present time. So I suggest detachment from these without negating them. Detachment from without negating them. And detach from, then identify this story of the universe, put ourselves into the universe, and then see how these fit into that universe. But make the universe normative instead of making these normative for the universe. Make the universe normative for these.
But human beings change so slowly. That too, as a historian too.
Well, the question is that that humans change slowly. We do, but we have not changed slowly since the Second World War. Since the Second World War, we have changed terribly fast. In fact, let me give you this statistic chemically. In the 1950s, we were making 500,000 tons of industrial chemicals each year. That's 500,000. Now we're making 200 million tons each year. We've gone from 500,000 tons of industrial chemicals each year.
That's not in changing us psychologically.
Well, it's put us into a new, well, it is a change psychologically. It's changed us from a pre-chemical age into a chemical age, and that is a vast psychological change.
But it doesn't affect me. I was born in 1957.
It's affecting you every day. It's affecting the air you breathe. It's affecting every bit of food you eat. It's affecting every breath you breathe.
Thank you. Okay, so.
It may be an anachronism. The question was if I want to do away with the word religion or our understanding of it as it is now, what about the word church? And my answer is that it may be an anachronism. That is that church needs to be reconstituted as bioregional communities. The church, the vital church of the future will not be simply composed of humans. In other words, I gave a talk to mission sending societies, all the mission societies of the Catholic Church some years ago, and saying that you cannot have any longer missions to human communities, whether political missions, economic missions, or religious communities. You cannot do anything for people so directly anymore. You can only work through them through their bioregional context. People need water and soil and food and seeds, and they need a place, a viable context, which is the larger biological community. And we have to learn to establish the biological communities, and the new the new substitute for church, or the new church, will be, to my mind, the bioregional community. If you want to know what a bioregional community is, you can read that chapter in The Dream of the Earth.
Excellent. And Steve, did you have your?
The question has to do with the suffering that the earth is involved in, and whether we can understand it better by understanding the sacrifice I've mentioned as regards the stars or this cosmological order. My answer is affirmative, that I think is our most profound way to understand it is in this manner, that sacrifice is a dimension of the universe. It's a dimension of every being. Every being is sacrificed for other beings. The living beings die into each other. We will eventually feed bacteria. And we have to think of bacteria when we think of our community, that these are the great forces. These are the most essential things. These are the beings that we must be grateful for. The bacteria that make the system workable. And we're beginning to understand this, that we must include the insects, that there is a very mysterious bond. And we have to be very, very careful about where we bestow the honors and what we are appreciative of. We have to be appreciative of everything. It's one of the characteristics of Lorne Isley, who I think is, perhaps I would nominate him for the finest essayist in the English language in the 20th century. But particularly in his books, the Unexpected Universe and the Night Country and a number of others, but his essays have a depth and a profundity and an insight into this particular problem that is unique, and it particularly has a dark side in his personality, I think, that enables him to probe deeply into the whole structure and functioning of the universe, particularly in this tragic dimension. So that to understand the Christ tragedy, the universe tragedy, insofar as the universe has a Christ dimension, the tragedies of the universe already have a Christ dimension. We have St. Paul, who was not content with the Christ of the Gospels, insisted on the cosmological dimension of Christ, particularly in the first chapter of the Epistle to the Colossians, where he mentions in Christ all things hold together. Well, this idea of the human as being the best way of talking about, it's being the best metaphor for understanding the universe, peoples have had that. It's been the Hindu have it, the Buddhists have it, the Chinese have it in a wonderful way. St. Paul brings it into a Christian modality. But this, and it has a special reference, I think, and is very obviously adaptable to in Christ all things hold together. There's no difficulty in the Christian seeing that an emergent universe has a Christ dimension from the beginning. In fact, in contemporary physics, there's the cosmological anthropic principle, where the physicists themselves see the human dimension of the universe from the beginning. Modern physics comes up with that. And as, who was it? Freeman Dyson comes up with the statement that the more he studies the structure of the universe and its functioning, the more convinced he is that the universe knew that we were coming. It was not a predetermined thing exactly, but the whole the decisions that had to be made from the very beginning of the universe were such that it would seem to establish a bias toward a certain modes of certain modes of the Earth's evolutionary process that enabled to it, did not predetermine it exactly, but it did enable the human to emerge eventually. So there are these ways in which a religious oriented people can read the universe in all the grandeur of their religious background.
Thank you, Tony.
This is an amazing weekend. A rare delight in the later years of a person's thinking to witness or to participate in such vital elaboration of a person's orientation, particularly when it's concerned with what might be called urgent issues or things on a scale that involve the destiny of so many people, and which reaches so deep into the tragic as well as the glorious dimensions of the universe, which really is what we're dealing with, the grandeur and tragic element, the ecstatic and the foreboding side of things, which balances off in a kind of excitement with existence. It's a challenging thing. We witness somewhat in these times, at least myself, I am awesomely struck with the passage of a work by Lawrence van der Post, who is one of the most impressive of the journalists of our times. He's a South African, white South African that grew up with the Bushmen. He tells some amazing stories of the Bushmen. And he has one story about an older Bushman talking to a younger Bushman and telling him about the universe and how to understand it. And he says, no matter what you think, everything has its right to be. Whether you think it's beautiful or less beautiful, everything has its right to be. And the bush understands necessity. And what's done by necessity, the bush accepts. But what is not done out of necessity, the bush will never understand, never accept. The bush has its watchers. You may think, deep in the darkness of the bush, you may think that you are alone and unobserved. He said that would be a most dangerous illusion. In the bush, you're never unobserved. I think this is something that we have lost our awareness of due to our technologies, due to our capacities to defend ourselves from the heat of summer and the cool of winter, to defend ourselves from starvation on a large scale, at least those of us that are in the so-called first world and the industrial part of the world, those of us that are able to call upon the assistance of our contemporary science and our capacity to manipulate the planet Earth. And we develop a certain arrogance, and I think that is something that is something we must be aware of the overall arrogance of our times in our part of the world. And that the first attitude toward the universe, there are several basic attitudes toward the universe that are needed. The first is gratitude for the universe, for what is given us, admiration, and entering into the celebration of the universe. Gratitude, reverence, and awesomeness. It puts us in a certain psychic mood of presence. And it's with a certain humility. Of course, humus and humility all go together. A certain humility before the world that we live in. And it is these experiences, perhaps, that dominate world literature. And when I think of the universe story, I think of it in terms primarily of literature. The new story I consider to be our expression of the epic context and interpretation of existence. We have the Homeric stories that constituted the overall mentality, the overall understanding that the Greeks had of themselves. And it was in this context that the Greeks articulated their existence. They articulated their world of meaning. It wasn't philosophy, it wasn't theology, it was story. A sequence of stories, a sequence of images and experiences. And so later, the intelligibility given to the Roman Empire was given not in any of the philosophies of the times primarily, or the ethical reflections of Marcus Aurelius or any of these. It was given primarily by Virgil in the Aeneid, where he interpreted the meaning of the empire. What was the meaning of it all? And that's where he wrote that glorious work of the Aeneid. So that Virgil's Aeneid is such that it was a German humanist, Hecker was his name, I've forgotten his first name, Theodor Hecker, yeah. He wrote a rather magnificent work called Virgil, Father of the West, because it was Virgil that guided the Western world in our through our basic orientation. And it's why Dante, when he wrote the story, that wonderful story of the universe, in which he put the real characters of history, all the characters of the Bible, all the characters of the Greek and Greek mythology, all the Roman persons, he summed up as no other person could sum up or ever has summed up the totality of the actual personal experience of humans. And he put them into that magnificent context of the Divine Comedy. So that Virgil is an important person. And he had, it was to explain the mission of the empire. And Dante takes two people as his guides. Virgil takes him through the greater part of the story, and later, of course, Beatrice. Later, after Virgil, after the empire, came that terrible moment of Western civilization and the story of the humanness in the sequence that we are heirs to is the fall of Rome. Virgil interpreted the rise of Rome, and then Augustine interpreted the fall of Rome. In interpreting the fall of Rome, which occurred in 410, when the Goths destroyed Rome, the whole world felt itself is at a total impasse. When you read the letters of the devastation, read the letters of St. Jerome describing the times, and you read the experience of the darkness of that time, it was an awesome thing, and the cry went up that the Christians were responsible because they had taken away the worship of the deities, and the gods were angry, and the gods had destroyed Rome. And so the Christians and the empire had become Christian at that time. So somebody had to answer this. And the Western world was in a period of dissolution for 6 centuries or so, all the way up from certainly from the 5th century on through to the 11th century with the temporary interlude in the time of Charlemagne. But it was a very dark period. But it was carried by this great work of Augustine. And the City of God is a history. It too, and it's a story. It's a story of the universe. And all these are always stories of the universe. Homer is telling the story of the universe and the human story. Virgil is telling the story of the universe with all the powers of the universe. Augustine is telling the story of the universe. And is interpreting this world of meaning. What is the dynamism? And so as no other work, the City of God created the medieval period with 2 other works, with the Bible and the ritual books. You wanted to know the basic sources and the mystical writings of Dionysius. Dionysius, who gave us our depth mystical tradition. So on up through the medieval period, and there Dante gives us the great work that he wrote to interpret his times. He wrote it also to interpret his period and to guide the future. So a person might say, and then after the Black Death, there was a further problem of Western civilization, of how to manage the future. And the person who more or less took charge of the thing and wrote the vision that to a large extent has guided us would be perhaps Francis Bacon, who projected a new world where he envisaged the fact that we would deal with the problem of the evil of the world, not by escape into some salvation into eternity, but by controlling the world. And all of this comes after the Black Death, occurred from 1347 to 1349, when a third of Europe died, apparently, and when half of the citizens of Florence died in 3 months. The traumatic moment, and the world, that's where the whole thing is rooted in. They had no explanation. They knew nothing about germs. The only thing they could figure was that the world had gone wicked, and God was angry with the world. So the best thing to do would be to escape out of the world some way. And that's when we get the dance of death It comes in the 15th century, and the ars moriendi, the art of dying. There were 40 different manuscripts or 40 different versions of this a manuscript that of the how to die. Also at this time come the morality plays. The morality plays that, especially the Everyman play, which tells us that the only things worthwhile are the only things worthwhile are what you take with you when you die, which are your virtues, and everything else is inconsequential, basically. So you get this movement into a devotionalism of the 15th century, and the return and the aversion to the extravagance of the gorgeous liturgies of the church, back to the simplicity of the gospel, back to a certain puritanical approach, and so forth, and to a severity in Western spirituality. These are overarching context in which our thinking is taking place. And so the issue has moved on into our times. And this extraordinary thing happened, is we discovered developmental time. That is the issue. That is the issue. The discovery of developmental time. And none of the religions of the world have been able to deal with it. It's that simple. And it's why almost all the spiritual tradition, the religious traditions now are in a state of neo-fundamentalism, because they're seizing on, they feel they're being swept away by a mechanistic world. We discovered time, but we discovered it in its mechanistic dimensions, in its non-spiritual dimensions, in the dimensions that we could control and could expand our physical comforts considerably, at the expense, however, of course, of the spirit dimension of things. And this development but was associated with and gave us our control of developmental time. But the religions, and obviously this was secularistic, this was mechanistic, this was alien to all our religious traditions, all our spirituality, because it's all in this world where time moves in ever-renewing seasonal cycles. What is born dies, what dies is born, and that is forever. And it always was, always would be. But it's a very secure mode of being. It's it's easily spiritualized. It's easily understandable, and it's not threatening, because no matter what happens, it can be renewed. But when you get to developmental, irreversible time, then you're into a world of real tragedy, the possibility of real tragedy. You're into a world of that's radically different. It's irreversible. Destruction of species, irreversible. And over long periods of billions of years, we of course don't know what would happen, but in terms of human historical time, assuming that humans would be here for a certain period, that might not be everlasting, it might be, but we don't know. We need something that would deal with this question of a universe that is an emergent reality where the divine has never before been experienced in this context. And in fact, it's completely devoid of the divine. And it's mechanistic. It's something that to be exploited by definition, to be exploited. It's by definition something that is waiting for humans to give it value by exploitation. And so that fascination with the exploitive side of the natural world gives us an unfeeling attitude toward it, what I call the autism, the pathology of the thing. And so when Brian and I do this work, we actually have in mind something of the dimensions of this epic tradition. In fact, Brian will be giving a course in California this fall on the universe story and the epic tradition, because this is our epic. It's this overarching context. It's not theological, basically. It's not philosophical. It's not ecological, or any of all these words come into the picture. But it's something that is more overarching, so to speak, than any of these more technical categories in which we do our thinking. Because these categories in which we do our thinking are already, to a certain extent, invalidated, not invalidated because we can't do without them, but they are already in need of a new context in which to function. So it's in this context that I think we need to envisage what we're about, because this is not exactly an effort to resolve the social issue in a direct way, but it's to say that until we have this peace with the planet, until we have this world of meaning, until we feel that we are integral with and the great emergent universe, and that our proper role is to be that being in whom the universe reflects on and celebrates itself and its numinous origin in a special mode of conscious self-awareness. That's who we are. And to have that as your primary consciousness. Now, Maria Montessori was very well aware of this when she did that book of hers to educate 6-year-old children. And the way we educate, she told the story herself rather well for the time, the story of the seeds. But the children need a story. They need a story, they need the universe story to be written for their turn. The story needs to be told 1,000 different ways. It needs to be told, it needs to be danced, it needs to be put to music, it needs to have its poetic expression and so forth. And so that I think as we gather and reflect on this, I think that we need to keep some of these overarching issues in our mind so that as we do these more technical studies in the theology, they must be done. They're urgent processes. But I think you can see that from what was said this morning, that the next group of thinking people in our interpretation of the religious traditions or our thought traditions, that the interpretation, I think you can see how deeply they have gotten into this, and that how amazingly impressive the depth of the discussion has become, and that this awareness, in fact, this morning that we were taught with practically the same thing and all practically the same words, that we are that being in whom the universe reflects on itself and attains a new mode of being in the human as its latest expression. Before I leave, I would just like to mention once again, though, the transition. All these epic stories are journey stories. And we are on the great journey, and I mentioned that the last time. And the story is to provide an understanding of our journey and to provide some of the psychic energy that we need to carry through the journey from the terminal Cenozoic to the emerging Ecozoic. Now, in doing this, there are a number of things, and that would be the subject for 6 or 8 other weekends, but I just want to mention the fourfold wisdom that we need. And it's evident here. We heard the indigenous wisdom, because it's the indigenous wisdom that has such a remarkable insight into what we've lost and what we need. We need the wisdom of women, which has been lost or has been set aside or ignored for such a long time. And it's clear here from the participation of women here that the principle, certainly the archetype of the future of the Ecozoic will be the archetype of woman. That is clear, just like the basic physical archetype, I think, is the what I call the great compassionate curve of the universe. We don't know if it's closed or open so far, but it is that which brings us all, everything together and holds us in an embrace. Now, the third thing is the wisdom of the traditions, and that is the patriarchal wisdom, and patriarchy has a bad name right now, and because it's so largely responsible for what has happened, but there's a wisdom that's there. It carries a deep wisdom in its foundation and also in so many of its ideals. And as all traditions, it has portrayed itself in a profound way. But the solution is not elimination, but re-thought and reactivation of its more creative possibility. And the third thing is that the wisdom is the new wisdom of science. And that, to some extent, I think, is the key element in this. That finally, the universe, a whole revelatory experience, I think, is available to us now. It's a new revelation. I consider that's why that chapter in the universe story on the modern revelation, I think it needs to be taken seriously. We have a new revelatory experience that we've avoided, and I don't think it's available to the other traditions as immediately as it is available to ourselves. Because if we can't enter into this new wisdom, then the other fixations, the religious fixations that will provide and support a great deal of human effort and will guide us to a certain extent, that will, it's just insufficient. It can contribute a great deal. The Buddhist tradition can contribute a great deal. The Hindu tradition, Chinese, these are stupendous achievements. But I generally say it this way: they cannot do what needs to be done, but we cannot do what needs to be done without these traditions. So that they are indispensable traditions. But for them to be able to really enter into the mystique, the mystical dimension of the scientific endeavor when it comes to listening, because really science is listening. So listening to the stars. And I don't talk so much about science as I do about our experiential understanding of the universe. We're having a new experience experientially with all the instrumentation and so forth. But so far we've not known how to do it. So I would leave you then with the suggestion that on our way, as we develop our different wisdoms, that we may find some help in this fourfold wisdom. Thank you.
Cosmic Genesis, is it going somewhere, and if so, where?
Well, the question is the universe going anywhere? And if it is going somewhere, what is it? Because that I see as a difference between Whitehead, basically, and Teilhard. In fact, this was the first question that Brian Swim asked me when we had met, and I was talking. He didn't know whether I knew anything or I hadn't. And he asked me the question of what's the difference? Didn't Whitehead do everything that Teilhard had done? I said, but the answer was that Teilhard has a story, Whitehead doesn't. But they both have development. And they both have processed thought. The universe is going to itself. The universe is going to the universe. There's no final term that it's going to. It's going to, it's a progressive sequence of celebratory episodes that we have not the slightest idea, so to speak, of what they might be. And that's why a story is so important. Story, there's always a suspense of what's next. We don't know. But we do know that we have an important role to play in the story, and that we have to be sensitized to how we fulfill our role. And our role, I would say, is certainly not to devastate the entire project of the biosystems of the planet, and to devastate our own existence, so that the only way I know to identify a final end, I don't know, there's no final end, it could end, but it could end at any time and be complete. I don't think that there is, Teilhard talks about the omega point, but I think that is taken from a biblical source and is a part of his Christian devotion, but is not really an answer. The question is that I suggested to put these four traditional forms of our society, of our culture, aside, or we step back from them. But what I said is not to, sometimes I say, put them away, at least for the present. And so I'm concerned that we be able to detach ourselves from these enough to be able to really look at them. I don't think the scripture scholars ever look at scripture. I don't think that Christians look at Christianity. Basically, they have a fixated attitude that's going to explicate. But but I don't want to, as I said, to detach from without negating and establish a new context and then see how these relate within the new context.
Praise the Lord.